I stared at the baptism photo in my trembling hands. The image blurred through tears I didn't expect to shed. The baby was unfamiliar, yet the date and the name on the back matched my husband's handwriting perfectly. How could this be? Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and at 72 years old, I thought I knew every corner of my life. I thought I knew every secret my family held. But that Tuesday evening in October, as the autumn leaves danced outside my window in Queens, everything I believed crumbled like paper in rain. The smell of coffee still lingered from my morning routine when I decided to clean out our bedroom closet. Joseph had been complaining about the clutter again, his voice sharp with that familiar edge of irritation that had become our daily soundtrack. The closet was a time capsule of 43 years of marriage. Old sweaters that smelled of mothballs, Christmas decorations from decades past, and photo albums wrapped in plastic bags. I was reaching for a box of old tax documents when my fingers brushed against something unexpected. A manila envelope, yellowed with age, tucked behind our wedding album. My heart skipped as I pulled it free. Inside was a single photograph, a baptism photo of a baby I had never seen before. The infant in the photo was beautiful, wrapped in delicate white lace, cradled in arms I didn't recognize. But it was the handwriting on the back that made my world tilt sideways. Little Daniel, baptized October 15th, 1995, written in Joseph's unmistakable script. The same handwriting that had signed our mortgage papers, birthday cards, and love letters from decades ago. My legs gave out. I sank onto our bed, the photo shaking in my hands like a leaf in a storm. Daniel. Who was Daniel? Joseph and I had only one child, Michael, born in 1994. We'd struggled for years to have him, going through treatments and heartbreak until that blessed day when the doctor placed our son in my arms. Or so I thought. The afternoon sun streamed through our bedroom window, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. I could hear the familiar sounds of our neighborhood, children playing in the courtyard below, the distant hum of traffic on Northern Boulevard, Mrs. Ramirez next door watering her plants on the fire escape. Normal sounds of a normal day, but nothing felt normal anymore. I studied every detail of that photograph. The baby's features were different from Michael's, a different nose, different eyes. The church looked familiar, though. The same stained glass windows, the same ornate baptismal font where we had christened Michael just a year after this mysterious Daniel. My hands shook as I reached for the phone to call Joseph. He was at his usual Tuesday card game with the boys from the old neighborhood, but something stopped me mid-dial. A voice inside my head whispered, "Wait, think about this first." That evening, I sat at our kitchen table, the photo hidden in my apron pocket, watching Joseph eat the meatloaf I'd prepared. He complained about the seasoning, as he always did. Too much salt, not enough pepper, never just right. I watched his weathered hands cut his food, the same hands that had written that baby's name on the back of a photograph I was never meant to see. "Joseph," I said carefully, my voice barely above a whisper, "do you remember when Michael was baptized?" He looked up from his plate, annoyed. "Of course I remember. What kind of question is that, Margaret? Just, do you remember anything else about that time? Anything you might have forgotten to tell me?" His eyes narrowed. "Are you feeling all right? You're asking strange questions." I chickened out. I smiled and shook my head, saying something about getting old and forgetful. But that night, as Joseph snored beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the photograph burning like a secret coal in my nightstand drawer. For 43 years, I had built my life around this man. I'd worked double shifts as a nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital to help pay for our home, coming back exhausted only to cook dinner, help Michael with homework, and listen to Joseph's complaints about his day at the construction company. When he hurt his back in 1998, I took on extra shifts to cover the mortgage while he recovered. When his mother was dying, I was the one who visited her daily, feeding her soup and holding her hand while Joseph claimed he was too busy with work. I had sacrificed my dreams of becoming a teacher to focus on nursing because it paid better. I had given up friendships because Joseph didn't like my gossipy friends. I had moved to Queens instead of staying in Brooklyn near my sister, because Joseph wanted a bigger apartment for less money. Every major decision in our marriage had been shaped by what Joseph wanted, what Joseph needed, what would make Joseph happy. And in return, I had received a steady diet of criticism, indifference, and what I was beginning to realize might have been lies. The next morning, I found myself digging deeper into our closet. Behind old coats and forgotten boxes, I discovered more envelopes, bank statements from accounts I didn't know existed, letters from people with names I didn't recognize, and tucked in the very back, another photo, this one of Joseph holding the same baby from the baptism picture, standing in front of a house I had never seen. My chest tightened. The house had a red door and white shutters, completely different from any place we had ever lived. Joseph was younger in the photo, maybe in his early 40s, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. He looked happy, genuinely happy in a way that made me realize how long it had been since I'd seen that expression directed at me. That afternoon, while Joseph was at work, I called my sister Rose in Brooklyn. Rose was 3 years younger than me, but had always been the sharper one, the one who could smell trouble before it crossed the bridge. "Rose," I said, my voice cracking despite my efforts to stay calm. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Did he ever tell you anything about having another family? Another child?" The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Rose spoke, her voice careful and measured. "Margaret, where is this coming from? Just answer me, please. Did you ever suspect anything?" Another pause. Then, quietly, "There were rumors, Maggie. Years ago, some of the wives at his construction company mentioned things, but you seemed so happy, and Michael was such a joy. I didn't want to." The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the kitchen floor. Rumors. There had been rumors, and my own sister had kept them from me to protect my happiness. But what happiness? Looking back now, I couldn't remember being truly happy for years. When was the last time Joseph and I had laughed together? When was the last time he'd asked about my day, my dreams, my fears? I picked up the phone with trembling hands. "Rose, I need you to tell me everything you know." What she told me over the next hour shattered the last remnants of the life I thought I understood. There had been whispers about Joseph being seen around Astoria with a younger woman and a small child. Someone had spotted him at a playground, pushing a stroller that wasn't Michael's. Another person had seen him coming out of a pediatrician's office with a baby that looked nothing like our son. "But Maggie," Rose said gently, "these were just rumors. Construction workers love to gossip. I never had proof, and you never seemed to suspect anything." Never seemed to suspect anything. That phrase haunted me as I hung up the phone. Had I been willfully blind? Had I been so desperate to maintain the illusion of a perfect marriage that I had ignored the signs? Or had Joseph simply been that good at living a double life? That evening, I confronted him directly. I placed the baptism photo on the dinner table next to his plate of pot roast and waited. Joseph looked at the photo, and for just a moment, his calm mask slipped. I saw fear flash across his face before he quickly composed himself. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice too casual. "That's not the question, Joseph. The question is who this baby is and why I'm just finding out about him now." Joseph pushed the photo away like it was contaminated. "I don't know what you're trying to prove, Margaret, but this has nothing to do with us. It has your handwriting on the back. That's not my handwriting." The lie came so easily, so smoothly, that I realized this wasn't his first deception. This was the response of someone who had been lying for so long that dishonesty had become his native language. "Joseph, please. I found bank statements. I found more photos. I know there's something you're not telling me. After all these years, don't I deserve the truth?" His face hardened into the cold mask I knew too well. "You deserve what I give you, Margaret. You have a home. You have a son. You have a husband who works hard to provide for you. Stop looking for problems where there aren't any." That night, I lay in bed listening to Joseph's steady breathing, wondering if I had spent 43 years sleeping next to a stranger. The man I had married, the man I had loved and supported and sacrificed for, was capable of looking me in the eye and lying without a tremor in his voice. How many other lies had I swallowed over the years? mistaking them for truth because I trusted the man telling them. The next day, while Joseph was at work, I did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I took the subway into Manhattan and visited a lawyer. The office was small and cluttered, squeezed between a deli and a dry cleaner on the Upper East Side. The lawyer, a kind woman named Ms. Chen, listened to my story with the patient expression of someone who had heard similar tales too many times. "Mrs. Rossetti," she said when I finished, "what exactly are you hoping to accomplish? Are you considering divorce?" Divorce. The word hit me like a physical blow. I had never seriously considered it, not even during our worst fights. Catholic girls from Brooklyn didn't get divorced, especially not after 43 years of marriage. But sitting in that small office, surrounded by law books and case files, I realized I was considering it now. For the first time in my adult life, I was imagining a future without Joseph Rossetti. "I don't know," I admitted. "I just need to understand what my options are. If he has another family, if he's been supporting another child all these years with money I helped earn, I need to know where I stand." Ms. Chen walked me through the basics of New York divorce law, explaining community property and asset division in terms that made my head spin. But one thing she said stuck with me. "The most important thing to remember, Mrs. Rossetti, is that you have rights. No matter how long you've been married, no matter what sacrifices you've made, you have the right to honesty and respect. You have the right to know how your family's money is being spent. You have the right to make informed decisions about your own life." Rights. I had almost forgotten I had any. When I got home, I found Michael waiting for me in the kitchen. He was 30 now, married to a nice girl named Lisa, working as an accountant in Midtown. He still came by for dinner twice a week, partly out of love and partly, I suspected, because he knew I needed the company. Joseph had grown increasingly withdrawn over the years, spending most evenings in front of the television or playing cards with his friends. "Mom, where were you today?" Michael asked, genuine concern in his voice. "Dad said you were acting strange yesterday, asking weird questions about old photos." I studied my son's face, looking for any resemblance to the baby in the baptism photo. There was none that I could see. Michael had my eyes and Joseph's stubborn chin, my hair color and Joseph's broad shoulders. He looked like both of us in a way that made biological sense. "Michael," I said carefully, "have you ever heard your father mention having other children? Ever hear any stories about brothers or sisters you might have had?" His face went pale. "Mom, what are you talking about? What's going on?" I showed him the baptism photo. I watched his face as he studied it, looking for recognition, for understanding, for any sign that he knew more than he was letting on. But Michael seemed as confused as I was. "I've never seen this baby before," he said slowly, "and I don't understand why you think Dad would know anything about it. Mom, are you feeling okay? You've been acting really strange lately." There it was again. The suggestion that I was the problem, that I was imagining things, that I was acting strange for asking reasonable questions about a photograph found in my own closet. Even my son, whom I loved more than life itself, was falling into the familiar pattern of making me doubt my own perceptions. That night at dinner, Michael mentioned my weird questions to his father. I watched Joseph nod sympathetically, playing the role of the patient husband dealing with an increasingly difficult wife. They talked about me like I wasn't sitting right there, discussing my strange behavior and suggesting I might need to see a doctor. "Maybe Mom's memory isn't what it used to be," Michael said gently. "Maybe she's getting confused about old photos." "Your mother has been under a lot of stress lately," Joseph replied, never looking at me directly. "Sometimes stress can make people imagine things that aren't there." I excused myself from the table and went to our bedroom, closing the door behind me. For 43 years, I had been the glue holding this family together. I had worked, cooked, cleaned, nursed them through illnesses, celebrated their victories, comforted them through defeats. I had given up my own ambitions to support theirs. I had never asked for much in return except honesty and respect. And now, when I discovered evidence that my husband might have been living a secret life, my own family was treating me like I was losing my mind. I pulled out the photograph again and studied it under the bedside lamp. The baby's face was peaceful, innocent, unaware that his existence would one day turn a woman's world upside down. I wondered about his mother. Was she young? Beautiful? Did she know about me? Or was she living her own version of my lie? The next morning, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable just a week earlier. I was going to hire a private investigator. I found one through Ms. Chen's office, a soft-spoken man named Tony Marcelli, who had retired from the NYPD and now helped people uncover uncomfortable truths about their families. We met at a coffee shop in Astoria, far enough from my neighborhood that I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. "Mrs. Rossetti," Tony said after I explained the situation, "I have to be honest with you. Sometimes the truth is more painful than the mystery. Are you prepared for what we might find?" I thought about that question for a long moment, watching steam rise from my coffee cup. Was I prepared? I had spent my entire adult life avoiding painful truths, smoothing over conflicts, pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. But I was 72 years old. How much time did I have left to live a lie? "Mr. Marcelli," I said finally, "I've been preparing for this truth my whole life. I just didn't know it until now." He nodded and opened a notebook. "Tell me everything you remember about 1995. Where was your husband working? What was his schedule like? Did he have any unusual expenses or unexplained absences?" As I talked, pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving began to fall into place. 1995 was the year Joseph claimed he was working extra shifts to save money for Michael's college fund. He was gone more evenings than usual, coming home late with stories about job sites and overtime pay. But I remembered now that his paychecks hadn't reflected all those extra hours he claimed to be working. 1995 was also the year Joseph suddenly became interested in real estate, driving around Queens and Long Island on weekends, claiming he was researching investment properties. At the time, I had been impressed by his ambition. Now I wondered if he had been shopping for a home for his other family. Most damning of all, 1995 was the year Joseph opened a separate bank account for business expenses that he said I didn't need to worry about. I had trusted him completely, never asking to see statements or receipts. Why would I? He was my husband, the father of my child, the man I had vowed to love and honor until death do us part. Tony took careful notes, asking questions that made me uncomfortable, but which I answered honestly. Yes, Joseph had been emotionally distant that year. Yes, he had started criticizing me more, finding fault with my cooking, my appearance, my conversation. Yes, he had begun spending more money on himself, new clothes, cologne, a gym membership he claimed was for his health, but which he used inconsistently. "Mrs. Rossetti," Tony said gently, "these are classic signs of a man leading a double life. The question is whether you want me to find proof of what you already suspect, or whether you want to try to forget what you've discovered and continue as you are." I thought of the woman in the mirror that morning, a 72-year-old stranger with tired eyes and silver hair who had spent decades making excuses for a man who might not deserve them. I thought of the years stretching ahead of me, however many I had left, and whether I wanted to spend them pretending everything was fine or living with the truth, whatever that truth might be. "Find the proof," I said. 2 weeks later, Tony called me with news that transformed my understanding of my entire marriage. He had found records of a second apartment Joseph had rented from 1994 to 2001 in a building in Astoria. He had found hospital records indicating Joseph had been listed as the father on another child's birth certificate. He had found photographs of Joseph with a woman named Elena Vasquez and a boy named Daniel who was now 29 years old. Elena had been a secretary at Joseph's construction company. She was 15 years younger than me, the daughter of immigrants from El Salvador who spoke limited English and trusted their daughter's older married boyfriend to take care of her and their child. Joseph had supported them for 7 years before Elena met and married another man who was willing to adopt Daniel and give the boy his name. The most heartbreaking detail Tony uncovered was that Joseph had never told Elena he was married. She had believed she was his only family, until someone at the construction company casually mentioned his wife and son in Queens. The shock of discovering Joseph's deception had prompted Elena to end their relationship and find a man who would be honest with her. "Mrs. Rossetti," Tony said carefully, "there's more. Elena is willing to speak with you if you want to meet her. She says she has questions about that time period too, and she thinks you both deserve answers. A week later, I sat across from Elena Vasquez Martinez in a small Dominican restaurant in Washington Heights. She was 57 now, still beautiful, with graying hair and kind eyes that reminded me of my own sister. Her English was accented but clear, and her story broke my heart. "I was 26 when I met Joseph," she said, stirring sugar into her café con leche. "My English was not so good, and I was alone in this country. My parents, they died when I was young in El Salvador. Joseph, he was so kind to me. He helped me with papers, with apartment, with everything. He say he loved me. He want to marry me someday." I listened to her describe the man I thought I knew, hearing familiar details twisted into a different story entirely. Joseph's kindness, his protectiveness, his promises of a future together. I had experienced all of these things too. But while he was making me feel loved and secure, he was making the same promises to Elena. "When I find out I was pregnant," Elena continued, "Joseph say he was so happy. He helped me find good doctor. He come to all appointments. When Daniel is born, Joseph cry like baby himself. He say Daniel is most beautiful thing he ever see." My throat tightened. I remembered when Michael was born, how Joseph had seemed pleased but not overwhelmed with joy. I had attributed his calm reaction to exhaustion and stress, never imagining that this wasn't his first experience of fatherhood. "I don't find out about you until Daniel is 3 years old," Elena said, her voice growing sad. "Someone at company, they make comment about Joseph's wife in Queens. I think they make mistake, you know? But then I ask Joseph directly, and he gets so angry. First he deny, then he say it's complicated, then he say he marry you because his family force him but he don't love you." The words hit me like a slap. Joseph had told Elena he didn't love me, that our marriage was an obligation rather than a choice. Yet he had never given me any indication he felt trapped or forced into our relationship. Even during our worst arguments, he had never suggested he wanted out. "I tell him he must choose," Elena continued. "Me and Daniel, or you and Michael. He promise he choose us. He say he leave you soon, when time is right. But years pass, and he never leave. Finally, I understand he never going to leave. He want both families, but that's not fair to no one." Elena had ended the relationship when Daniel was 7, explaining to her son that his father was a complicated man who loved him but couldn't be with them full time. She had met her current husband, Roberto, at church, and he had adopted Daniel, giving the boy stability and a father who was present every day, not just when convenient. "Mrs. Margaret," Elena said, reaching across the table to touch my hand, "I want you to know I never try to break up your marriage. When I find out about you, I feel terrible. I think maybe I am homewrecker. Maybe I destroy happy family. But Joseph, he tell me you and him are not happy, that you stay together only for son." I squeezed her hand. This woman who had been as deceived as I had been, who had also believed Joseph's lies and promises. "Elena, Joseph told me many things over the years, but he never told me I was unhappy. He never gave me the choice to decide for myself whether I wanted to stay in a marriage with a man who had another family. We talked for 3 hours, sharing stories and memories, piecing together the puzzle of Joseph's double life. Elena showed me pictures of Daniel growing up. First communion, school plays, graduation from high school, and then college. He was a handsome young man who looked remarkably like Joseph had at that age, with the same dark hair and strong jaw. "He know about you now," Elena said. "Daniel, he ask questions when he get older. I tell him truth. His father have another family, and that's why he can't live with us. Daniel, he angry for long time. He say he want to meet his brother Michael, maybe meet you too. But I tell him is not his decision to make. That decision belong to you and your family." As I walked home from Washington Heights that evening, my mind reeled with everything I had learned. I felt betrayed, angry, heartbroken, but also strangely relieved. For years, I had sensed something was wrong with my marriage, without being able to identify what it was. I had attributed Joseph's emotional distance to work stress, health problems, the natural evolution of a long relationship. I had blamed myself for not being interesting enough, attractive enough, understanding enough to hold his attention. Now I knew the truth. The problem wasn't that I was insufficient. The problem was that Joseph was living 2 different lives, dividing his emotional and financial resources between two families, never giving either of us his complete attention or commitment. When I got home, Joseph was watching television in his recliner, a picture of domestic normalcy that now seemed like an elaborate performance piece. I had been living with an actor all these years, a man who could play the role of devoted husband and father while maintaining an entirely separate life across town. "Where were you all afternoon?" he asked without looking away from the screen. "I came home early and you weren't here." For 43 years, I had answered that question automatically, accounting for my time like a teenager reporting to a parent. Today, I simply said, "Out." He looked at me then, sensing something different in my tone. "Out where?" "Having coffee with a friend." It wasn't exactly a lie. Elena and I had drunk coffee together, and after 3 hours of honest conversation, she felt more like a friend than most of the people in my regular social circle. That night, as Joseph slept beside me, I lay awake planning my next moves. I had evidence now, proof of his deception that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. I had spoken to the woman he had betrayed me with, who was as much a victim of his lies as I was. I had the name and location of a son I had never met, a young man who had grown up wondering why his father couldn't love him enough to live in the same house. The question now was what I wanted to do with this information. I thought about Elena's strength in ending a relationship with a man she loved because she knew it was built on deception. I thought about her courage in raising a child alone rather than accepting crumbs of attention from a man who refused to commit fully to either of his families. I thought about Daniel, who had grown up believing his father's divided attention was normal, who had questions about the brother he had never been allowed to meet. Most of all, I thought about myself. I was 72 years old. If I lived to be 90, I had 18 years left. How did I want to spend those years? Continuing to pretend I didn't know what I now knew, choosing willful ignorance over painful truth? Or finally, after 7 decades of putting everyone else's needs before my own, making choices based on what would make me feel respected, valued, and whole. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called in sick to my part-time job at the medical clinic where I worked 3 days a week, and I spent the day doing exactly what I wanted to do. I took a long bath with lavender salts. I made myself a breakfast of Eggs Benedict, something Joseph had always claimed was too fancy for regular people. I called my sister Rose and told her everything, about the photograph, about Elena, about the son I had never met. "Oh, Maggie," Rose said when I finished, her voice thick with tears. "I'm so sorry. I should have pushed you to investigate those rumors years ago. I should have fought harder to make you see what was happening. Rose, this isn't your fault. This is Joseph's fault for lying, and my fault for not asking harder questions when things didn't add up. But I'm asking them now, and I'm going to keep asking them until I get answers." That afternoon, I drove to the bank where Joseph and I had our joint checking account and asked to see statements going back 10 years. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. Regular transfers to accounts I had never heard of, payments to stores and services in neighborhoods I had never visited, cash withdrawals that were too large and too frequent to be explained by normal household expenses. I had been working part-time, contributing my paychecks to our household budget, while Joseph had been skimming money from our joint account to support his other life. Money I had earned through long shifts helping sick patients had been used to buy gifts for another woman, to pay rent on another apartment, to support a child I had been denied the chance to know. The bank manager, a kind woman about my daughter-in-law's age, looked at my face as I studied the statements and asked gently, "Mrs. Rossetti, are you all right? Is there something wrong with these accounts?" "No," I said, folding the papers carefully and putting them in my purse. "There's nothing wrong with the accounts, but there's definitely something wrong with my marriage." That evening, I laid the bank statements on the kitchen table next to Joseph's dinner plate, just as I had done with the baptism photograph weeks earlier. This time, I was prepared for his reaction. "Joseph," I said calmly, "I need you to explain these transfers and withdrawals. Where has this money been going?" He glanced at the statements, and I saw him calculate quickly, trying to decide which lie would be most effective. The man who had once seemed like a solid, dependable provider now appeared to me as what he really was, a skilled manipulator who had been managing multiple deceptions for decades. Those are business expenses, he said finally. Equipment, supplies, things for the job sites. Mo, for 26 years, the same amounts transferred to the same accounts every month. His jaw tightened. Margaret, I don't like your tone. I don't like being interrogated in my own home about how I spend money I earned. Money we earned, Joseph. Money I contributed to with my nursing salary. Money that was supposed to be supporting our family. Our one family. Our only family. We stared at each other across the table, and I saw something I had never seen before in Joseph's eyes. Fear. He was afraid of me, afraid of what I might know, afraid of losing control of the narrative he had been spinning for so many years. I met Elena, I said quietly. The color drained from his face. For a moment, he looked like he might deny knowing who Elena was, but then he seemed to realize that strategy wouldn't work anymore. What did she tell you? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She told me the truth, Joseph. Something you haven't done in our entire marriage. She told me about Daniel. She told me about the apartment in Astoria. She told me about the promises you made to her and broke. She told me about the promises you made to me and broke too. Joseph stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. Whatever she told you, she's lying. Elena is a bitter woman who can't accept that our relationship is over. She's been trying to cause trouble for years. Elena hasn't contacted me in 26 years, Joseph. I found her. I went looking for the truth because I was tired of living in your web of lies. And you know what I discovered? Elena doesn't want anything from you. She's not trying to cause trouble. She's happily married to a man who doesn't lie to her. She just wanted to finally meet the woman she was told didn't matter, the wife you claimed you didn't love. I never said I didn't love you, Joseph protested, but his voice lacked conviction. You told Elena you married me because your family forced you to, but you didn't love me. You told her you were going to leave me as soon as the time was right. You told her for 7 years that you were going to choose her and Daniel over me and Michael. Were those lies too, Joseph? Or were the promises you made to me the lies? Joseph slammed his fist on the table, making me jump. Enough! This is ancient history, Margaret. Whatever happened back then is over and done with. Elena moved on. I moved on. We all moved on. Why are you trying to dig up the past? Because the past explains the present, Joseph. It explains why our marriage has felt empty for so many years. It explains why you've been emotionally absent even when you were physically present. It explains why I've always felt like I wasn't enough for you, because I wasn't your only focus, and I never was. That night, Joseph slept in the guest room. The next morning, he left for work without speaking to me, slamming the front door so hard the windows rattled. For the first time in 43 years of marriage, I didn't worry about his anger. I didn't try to smooth things over or apologize for upsetting him. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Relief. The truth was finally out in the open. The pretense was over. The careful dance we had been performing for so many years, him hiding his deceptions, me ignoring my suspicions, was finished. Whatever happened next would be built on honesty rather than illusion. I spent that day calling people I should have contacted years earlier. I made an appointment with a marriage counselor, knowing Joseph would never agree to attend, but wanting to have my own space to process what I had learned. I scheduled a meeting with a financial advisor to understand how to separate my assets from Joseph's. I called a locksmith to change the locks on our apartment, not to keep Joseph out permanently, but to make it clear that the old rules of our relationship no longer applied. Most importantly, I called Michael and asked him to come over that evening. It was time to tell my son that he had a brother he had never met. Michael arrived at 6:30, still in his work clothes, looking worried. "Mom, what's going on? Dad called me today and said you were having some kind of breakdown. He said you were making accusations and threatening to leave him." I handed Michael a cup of coffee and sat down across from him at the kitchen table. Between us lay the baptism photograph, the bank statements, and a folder of documents Tony Marcelli had compiled during his investigation. "Michael," I said, "I'm going to tell you a story about your father that's going to be very hard to hear. But you're 30 years old, and you deserve to know the truth about your family." I told him everything. About finding the photograph, about hiring the investigator, about meeting Elena, and learning about Daniel. I watched my son's face change as the pieces of the puzzle came together, as he began to understand why his father had always seemed emotionally distant, why our family had always felt incomplete in ways Michael couldn't identify. "I have a brother?" he said when I finished, his voice small and confused. "You have a half-brother named Daniel. He's 29 years old, just a year younger than you. He works as a teacher in Brooklyn, and according to Elena, he's always wanted to meet you. Your father has kept you apart your entire lives." Michael stared at the baptism photograph, studying the baby's face as if trying to recognize something familiar. "Does Dad know you found out about all this?" "He knows. We had a confrontation last night. He's angry that I discovered his secret, but he's not denying it anymore." "Mom," Michael said carefully, "what are you going to do? Are you really thinking about leaving Dad after all these years?" It was the question I had been asking myself for weeks. Was I prepared to end a marriage that had lasted longer than most people's entire adult lives? Was I ready to face the practical and emotional challenges of being divorced and alone at 72? "Michael, I don't know what I'm going to do about your father, but I know what I'm not going to do anymore. I'm not going to pretend I don't know what I know. I'm not going to accept being lied to. I'm not going to share my husband's attention and resources with another family without my knowledge or consent. I'm not going to spend whatever years I have left living a lie." My son reached across the table and took my hand. "Mom, I support whatever decision you make. You've sacrificed so much for our family over the years. It's time for you to think about what would make you happy." That simple statement, "what would make you happy," hit me like a revelation. When was the last time anyone had asked me what would make me happy? When was the last time I had asked myself that question? For so many years, my happiness had been tied to other people's satisfaction. If Joseph was content, if Michael was thriving, if the household was running smoothly, then I considered myself successful. My own desires, dreams, and needs had become secondary to everyone else's. I had become so focused on being a good wife and mother that I had forgotten to be a good advocate for myself. That night, I made a list of things that would make me happy. The list was longer than I expected. Honest communication in my relationships, financial security that didn't depend on someone else's decisions, time to pursue interests I had neglected, freedom to travel and see friends without having to justify my choices, respect for my intelligence and opinions, and most of all, the dignity of living without deception. Looking at that list, I realized that very few of those things were possible in my marriage to Joseph as it currently existed. Too much trust had been broken. Too many lies had been told. Too much damage had been done to the foundation of our relationship. The next morning, Joseph came home from work early, looking haggard and defeated. He found me in the kitchen, making soup for dinner, acting as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed, and we both knew it. "Margaret," he said, his voice gentler than it had been in days, "we need to talk." I turned off the stove and sat down at the table, waiting for him to say whatever he had come home to say. "I know I made mistakes," he began. "Big mistakes. But that was a long time ago. Elena and I, that's over and done with. It's been over for more than 20 years. Daniel is grown up now with his own life. Can't we just move forward from here?" It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get from Joseph. He was admitting, finally, that there had been another woman and another child. He was acknowledging that these were mistakes rather than misunderstandings. But he was also asking me to forget about 26 years of deception as if they were a minor inconvenience rather than a betrayal that had shaped our entire marriage. "Joseph," I said slowly, "I need you to understand something. This isn't just about Elena and Daniel. This is about every day for 26 years that you looked me in the eye and lied to me. This is about every dollar you took from our joint account to support another family while telling me we needed to be more careful with money. This is about every time I felt like something was wrong with our marriage, and you convinced me the problem was with me." He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I never meant to hurt you, Margaret. Everything I did was to protect you, to keep our family together." "You kept our family together by having another family? You protected me by lying to me? Joseph, do you understand how those words sound? I was trying to handle a difficult situation the best way I knew how, by being dishonest with everyone involved. By making decisions that affected my life without including me in those decisions? By letting me believe I was your only priority when I was actually sharing your attention with another woman and child? Joseph was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands folded on the table. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with something that might have been regret. "What do you want from me, Margaret? What can I do to fix this?" It was a fair question, and I had been thinking about it for days. What would it take to repair a marriage built on such substantial deception? What would convince me that Joseph could be trusted again after lying successfully for so many years? "I want complete honesty from now on," I said. "About everything. I want access to all financial accounts and records. I want to meet Daniel, and I want you to facilitate that meeting. I want you to go to marriage counseling with me so we can work through this with professional help. And I want you to understand that if I discover any other lies about anything, I will leave you without another conversation." Joseph winced at the word leave, but he nodded slowly. "Okay, I can do those things. I want to save our marriage, Margaret. Despite everything, I do love you." "Then prove it," I said. "Not with words, but with actions. Show me that I matter enough to you to be honest with. Show me that our marriage is worth rebuilding on a foundation of truth instead of lies." The next few weeks were the strangest of our 43-year marriage. Joseph kept his promises, at least initially. He gave me passwords to bank accounts I hadn't known existed. He showed me records of the money he had been sending to Elena over the years, money that had stopped when she remarried, but which had continued to be withdrawn and spent in ways I was still trying to understand. Most surprisingly, he agreed to contact Daniel and arrange a meeting. The phone call was awkward and emotional, from what I could observe. Joseph explained to his younger son that his wife, me, had recently learned about Daniel's existence and wanted to meet him. Daniel, according to Joseph, was surprised but willing to have lunch with both of us. We met at a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, neutral territory that didn't belong to either family. Daniel arrived first, and I recognized him immediately, despite having seen only one photograph. He had Joseph's eyes and Elena's smile, a combination that was somehow both familiar and foreign. "Mrs. Rossetti," he said, standing when I approached the table. "I'm Daniel Martinez." Martinez. He had taken his stepfather's name, the name of the man who had raised him daily, rather than the man who had visited him occasionally. I wondered if that choice had hurt Joseph, and whether he had any right to be hurt by it. "Please call me Margaret," I said, sitting down across from him. "I'm sorry it's taken so long for us to meet. I didn't know you existed until recently." Daniel nodded, seeming to understand the implications of that statement. "My mom told me about you when I was growing up. She always spoke about you with respect. She said you were a good woman who deserved better than the situation my father put everyone in." Joseph squirmed uncomfortably, but I appreciated Daniel's directness. Elena had raised a son who could speak honestly about difficult subjects. "Daniel," I said, "I want you to know that I'm not angry with you or your mother. You didn't choose this situation, and Elena didn't know the full truth when she got involved with your father. We were both deceived." "I know," Daniel said, "and I want you to know that I'm not angry with you either. For a long time, I was angry with my father for not choosing to live with me and Mom, but as I got older, I realized the problem wasn't that he had another family. The problem was that he wasn't honest with anyone about what he was doing." Joseph finally spoke up. "Daniel, I know I made mistakes. I was young and stupid and I handled everything badly, but I want you to know that I love you. I always have." Daniel looked at his father with eyes that were older than his 29 years. "Dad, I know you love me, but love isn't just a feeling. It's also a choice, and a commitment, and a way of treating people. You can love someone and still hurt them if you choose lies over truth." The wisdom in those words took my breath away. This young man, who had grown up as the secret child of a secret relationship, understood something about love that had taken me 7 decades to learn. That good intentions don't excuse dishonest actions. That love without respect is incomplete. We talked for 2 hours, sharing stories and getting to know each other. Daniel told me about his job teaching high school English, his love of poetry, his plans to travel to Europe the following summer. I told him about my years as a nurse, my regrets about not pursuing teaching, my hope to volunteer with literacy programs now that I was semi-retired. Most remarkably, Daniel and I discovered that we had been living parallel lives just miles apart. He had attended a high school in Queens, not far from where I lived. He had worked part-time at a grocery store where I shopped regularly. We might have passed each other on the street dozens of times without knowing we were connected. At the end of lunch, Daniel asked if he could meet Michael. "I've always wondered about my brother," he said. "I used to see kids who looked like me and wonder if we were related." Joseph looked nervous about the idea of his two sons meeting, but I was thrilled. "I'll ask Michael if he's interested," I promised. "I think he'd like to know you too." As we prepared to leave, Daniel hugged me. A genuine, warm embrace that felt like the beginning of a relationship I hadn't known I was missing. "Margaret," he said, "thank you for reaching out. Thank you for wanting to know me. I hope we can stay in touch." "I hope so too," I said, meaning it completely. That night, Joseph and I had the most honest conversation we had shared in years. He admitted that maintaining relationships with two families had been exhausting and stressful, but that he hadn't known how to end either relationship without causing pain. "I kept thinking I could make it work," he said. "I thought if I just managed everything carefully, everyone could be happy. But instead, I made everyone unhappy, and I made myself miserable too." "Joseph," I said, "the problem wasn't that you couldn't make everyone happy. The problem was that you tried to solve an adult problem with adolescent solutions. Instead of being honest about your feelings and letting people make informed choices, you decided to control everything through deception. That was never going to work long term." He nodded, looking older than his 75 years. "I know that now. I've known it for a long time. But by the time I realized how badly I had messed everything up, I was so deep in lies that telling the truth seemed impossible." "It's possible now," I said. "We're telling the truth now. The question is whether it's too late to build something real from what's left." Over the following months, Joseph and I attended marriage counseling together. The sessions were difficult and emotional, involving conversations we should have had decades earlier. Joseph had to confront the selfishness and cowardice that had driven his choices. I had to confront my own role in enabling his deception by not asking harder questions when things didn't make sense. Our counselor, Dr. Williams, was a patient woman who had worked with many couples dealing with infidelity and deception. She helped us understand that rebuilding trust would be a slow process requiring consistent honesty from Joseph and consistent boundaries from me. "Margaret," Dr. Williams said during one session, "you've spent so many years accommodating Joseph's lies that you've lost track of your own needs and desires. Part of your healing process will involve rediscovering what you want from life, independent of what makes other people happy." It was terrifying and liberating advice. For the first time in decades, I began making choices based purely on what I wanted, rather than what would keep peace in my family. I enrolled in a watercolor painting class at the community center in Astoria. I had always loved art, but had never made time to pursue it seriously. Now, twice a week, I spent 2 hours mixing colors and learning techniques, surrounded by other women my age who had also decided it wasn't too late to try something new. I joined a book club at the local library, finally having literary conversations I had missed since giving up my dream of becoming a teacher. I reconnected with old friends from nursing school, women I had lost touch with during the busy years of raising Michael and supporting Joseph's career. Most importantly, I developed a relationship with Daniel that was independent of Joseph. He came to dinner once a month, sometimes bringing his girlfriend, a lovely teacher named Sarah, who made him laugh in ways that reminded me of young love. Through Daniel, I got to know Elena better, and we became something I never expected: friends. Elena and I met for coffee every few weeks, comparing notes about our experiences with Joseph and laughing about the absurdities of the situation we had all found ourselves in. She was generous and kind, never bitter about the years she had wasted waiting for Joseph to choose her, grateful instead for the beautiful son those years had given her. "You know what's funny?" Elena said during one of our coffee dates. "I used to be jealous of you. I thought you had the life I wanted, the wedding ring, the legitimate relationship, the respect of being the real wife. But now I think I was the lucky one. I only wasted 7 years on Joseph's lies. You wasted 43. Her words stung because they contained truth, but they also contained liberation. I had wasted decades, but I was still alive, still capable of making different choices, still able to build relationships based on honesty and mutual respect. Michael and Daniel became friends, bonding over shared DNA and shared frustration with their father's choices. They looked remarkably alike, something that became more apparent as they spent time together. They had similar mannerisms, similar humor, similar values that they had somehow developed despite growing up in completely different environments. "It's weird," Michael told me after spending an afternoon with Daniel. "He feels like family in a way that's completely natural. It's like I always knew something was missing, and now I know what it was." Joseph struggled with his son's relationship initially, worried that they would compare notes about his parenting and find him wanting. But gradually, he began to see their friendship as a gift, a chance for both young men to have the brother relationship they had been denied during childhood. The hardest part of our marriage counseling was addressing the financial deception. Over the years, Joseph had diverted tens of thousands of dollars from our joint accounts to support Elena and Daniel, money that should have gone toward our retirement savings, Michael's college expenses, or my own financial security. "I always planned to pay it back," Joseph insisted during one particularly difficult session. "With what money?" I asked. "You were taking from our joint account, which meant you were taking money I earned too. How were you going to pay back money you stole from me with money that was already partially mine?" The illogical nature of Joseph's thinking became clear during these conversations. He had convinced himself that he was managing a complex situation when he was actually making it worse through continued deception. His need to avoid difficult conversations had created far more difficulty than honesty ever would have. Dr. Williams helped us work out a financial plan that would rebuild my security while acknowledging the reality of money that could never be recovered. Joseph took out a loan against his pension to create a separate retirement account in my name only. He signed over the deed to our apartment, ensuring I would have housing security regardless of what happened to our marriage. Most importantly, we opened completely separate bank accounts. Joseph could no longer access money I earned, and I could no longer be surprised by unexplained withdrawals from accounts I thought were joint. The financial transparency was a concrete symbol of the honesty we were trying to build. After 8 months of counseling, Dr. Williams asked us to evaluate our progress and decide whether we wanted to continue trying to rebuild our marriage or whether we would be happier separating. "Some couples can recover from major deceptions," she explained. "Others discover that too much damage has been done, and they're better as friends than as spouses. There's no shame in either choice, but you need to be honest about what's working and what isn't." Joseph and I took a week to think about it separately, spending time apart to evaluate our feelings without the pressure of trying to please each other. I stayed with Rose in Brooklyn, sleeping in her guest room and remembering what it felt like to wake up without immediately considering someone else's needs and moods. During that week, I realized something important. I felt lighter when Joseph wasn't around. Not because I didn't care about him, but because I didn't have to manage his emotions alongside my own. I didn't have to wonder what he was hiding, or whether he was being completely honest. I didn't have to perform the role of satisfied wife when I was still processing decades of deception. Joseph, during his week alone, came to a similar conclusion. "Margaret," he told me when we met to discuss our decisions, "I love you, and I'm grateful that you've given me the chance to try to make things right. But I think we both know that our marriage died a long time ago. We've been trying to resurrect something that needs to be buried so we can both move forward." The divorce was amicable, as divorces go. We had been married long enough that most of our assets were truly shared, and we both wanted to treat each other fairly. Joseph moved to a smaller apartment in Astoria, close enough that we could still see each other regularly, but far enough that we each had space to build independent lives. The most surprising part of the divorce was how relieved I felt. I had been afraid of being alone after so many years of marriage, but solitude turned out to be a gift I gave myself. For the first time in my adult life, every decision I made was my own. I could eat dinner at 9 p.m. or 6 p.m. or not at all. I could watch romantic comedies instead of action movies. I could spend money on art supplies without justifying the expense to anyone. I painted my apartment in colors Joseph had always said were too bold, deep blues and warm yellows that made me happy every time I walked through the door. I bought furniture that suited my taste rather than his idea of what was practical. I hung my watercolor paintings on the walls, amateur works that brought me joy regardless of their technical quality. Most importantly, I developed friendships with women who knew my whole story and respected the choices I had made. My book club friends, my painting class companions, my neighbor Mrs. Ramirez. These women became a support system I hadn't realized I was missing. We talked honestly about marriage, aging, dreams deferred and dreams discovered. We celebrated each other's victories and supported each other through difficulties. Elena became one of my closest friends, a development that amused everyone who knew our history. Only you two would become best friends after discovering you were sharing the same man, Rose said, shaking her head in amazement. But Elena and I understood each other in ways that other people couldn't. We had both loved the same flawed man, both been deceived by him, both chosen to build better lives after the truth came out. Our friendship was built on shared experience and mutual respect rather than obligation or habit. Daniel and Sarah came to dinner regularly, sometimes joined by Michael and his wife Lisa. These family gatherings were smaller than the complicated holiday celebrations of my marriage, but they were also more genuine. Everyone who came to my table came because they wanted to be there, not because they felt obligated or guilty. Joseph remained part of our extended family, attending birthday parties and holiday dinners when invited, but his role had changed from central figure to peripheral participant. He seemed more relaxed in this new position, freed from the pressure of maintaining lies and managing competing loyalties. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Michael told me one evening as we cleaned up after a dinner party. "You could have stayed angry and bitter, but instead you built something better. You turned a terrible betrayal into an opportunity to create the life you actually wanted." I thought about his words as I prepared for bed that night, looking around my peaceful apartment filled with artwork and books and flowers I had chosen because they made me happy. At 74, I had discovered that it's never too late to choose authenticity over convenience, truth over comfort, self-respect over the illusion of security. The woman in the mirror now had silver hair and laugh lines and age spots, but her eyes were clearer than they had been in decades. She had learned difficult lessons about love and trust, and the difference between being alone and being lonely. She had discovered that happiness built on lies isn't really happiness at all, and that the truth, however painful initially, provides a foundation for genuine joy. 6 months after my divorce was finalized, I did something I had dreamed about for years, but never thought possible. I took a trip to Italy by myself. For 2 weeks, I wandered through museums and churches and small cafes, sketching in my travel journal and talking to strangers in broken Italian. I didn't have to consider anyone else's interests or preferences. I didn't have to compromise on restaurants or plan activities around someone else's energy level. The trip was a celebration of independence I had never expected to experience. Every morning, I woke up in a different city with no obligations except to myself. Every evening, I fell asleep satisfied with choices I had made based purely on what brought me joy. On my last day in Rome, I sat in a small cafe near the Trevi Fountain, drinking espresso and writing postcards to the people who had supported me through my transformation. To Rose, who had listened to years of complaints without judgment. To Dr. Williams, who had helped me rediscover my own voice. To Elena, who had shown me that former enemies could become treasured friends. To Daniel and Sarah, who had brought unexpected joy into my life. To Michael and Lisa, who had supported my difficult decisions even when it made their lives more complicated. And finally, surprisingly, to Joseph. Not with anger or recrimination, but with gratitude for the lessons our marriage had taught me about the importance of honesty, the value of self-respect, and the courage required to start over when something isn't working. "Thank you for teaching me that I'm stronger than I thought I was," I wrote. "Thank you for showing me that love without respect isn't really love at all. Thank you for giving me the gift of knowing I can survive anything, including the truth about the people I love most." As I sealed the postcard and dropped it in a mailbox near the fountain, I made a wish. Not for romance or wealth or fame, but for continued courage to live authentically, to choose truth over comfort, to value myself enough to demand honest treatment from the people in my life. The wish felt like a promise to the 74-year-old woman I had become, The woman who had learned that it's never too late to choose yourself, never too late to start over, never too late to build a life based on truth rather than illusion. Flying home to New York, looking down at the ocean from 30,000 feet, I thought about all the women my age who might be living with secrets they don't want to face, accepting treatment they don't deserve, staying in situations that diminish rather than nurture their spirits. I thought about the courage it takes to ask hard questions and the strength required to act on uncomfortable answers. I thought about the baptism photograph that had started my journey toward truth, a picture of a baby I never met who led me to discover parts of myself I had forgotten existed. That photograph had been both an ending and a beginning, the last day of living a lie, and the first day of choosing to live authentically. Now, as I prepare to share this story with you, I want you to know that transformation is possible at any age, under any circumstances. The woman who found that photograph was tired, lonely, and afraid of the truth. The woman telling you this story is energetic, surrounded by genuine relationships, and grateful for every difficult lesson that led her to this moment. If my story sounds familiar, if you recognize yourself in the woman who spent decades accepting lies because the truth seemed too frightening to face, I want you to know that you are braver than you think you are. You are stronger than you believe. You deserve relationships built on honesty and respect, regardless of how long you've been accepting something less. The truth may be painful initially, but it's also liberating. Living authentically may require difficult changes, but those changes make room for genuine joy. Starting over may be scary, but it's also an opportunity to build something better than what you're leaving behind. Have you ever discovered a secret that changed everything you thought you knew about your life? Have you ever had to choose between comfortable lies and uncomfortable truths? Have you ever found the courage to start over when something wasn't working? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our experiences helps other people find the courage to write their own new chapters. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own strength, if it gave you hope that transformation is possible at any age, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these stories with people who need to hear them. Thank you for listening to my journey. Thank you for believing, as I now believe, that it's never too late to choose truth, never too late to choose yourself, never too late to build a life worthy of the person you've always been inside.